During 1636, Harvard University opens its doors in Massachusetts and becomes America's pride. The oldest university in the nation. Every American school child learns about Harvard. It represents the birth of higher education in the New World. But here's what they never told you. 200 years before Harvard existed, Sankore University in Timbuktu, Mali, had 25,000 students and up to 700,000 manuscripts. While Harvard was teaching 9 students in its first graduating class, Timbuktu had been producing thousands of scholars for 2 centuries. In astronomy, in medicine, in algebra, in Islamic law, in philosophy. 700,000 manuscripts, not 700, not 7,000, 700,000 books. That's more than any European city possessed at that time. More than Paris, more than London, more than Rome. Why didn't they teach you this in school? Why does Harvard get celebrated in every history textbook, while Sankore gets completely erased? That's not an accident. That's policy. That's intentional. That's systematic erasure designed to make you believe a lie about your ancestors, about Africa, about civilization itself. Everything you learned about Africa was a lie. Everything you learned about who had knowledge and who didn't was backwards. The truth has been buried for 500 years. But today, right now, that end, this is the story they tried to erase. This is your stolen inheritance. And by the time you finish watching this video, you'll never see world history the same way again. Let me be clear about what you're about to discover. This isn't just interesting history. This is revelation that will shake the foundation of everything you were taught. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why Africa had the world's greatest university, while Europe was burning books and dying from plague. You'll understand how your ancestors were professors, teaching students from Cairo, Baghdad, and even parts of Europe. Not primitives waiting to be civilized. Professors, doctors, astronomers, mathematicians. You'll see why African families risked their lives hiding manuscripts through colonization and wars, why they buried books underground, why they concealed them in caves, why some manuscripts remained hidden for 500 years. Because they knew what we're about to rediscover together. These books were power. These books were proof. These books were the evidence of greatness that threatened the entire colonial project. And here's what matters most. You'll understand how this erasure made slavery psychologically possible, how it continues to justify inequality today, how recovering this truth threatens the entire system that benefits from your ignorance. This isn't ancient history. This is your history. Your ancestors walked those library halls in Timbuktu. Your bloodline carries that intellectual legacy, and they stole it from you, from all of us. After this video, you'll never accept phrases like African Americans have no history the same way again. You'll know it for what it is. A deliberate lie designed to justify centuries of theft, centuries of oppression, centuries of psychological warfare. So here's my promise to you. I'm going to give you names, specific dates, specific places, specific numbers, not vague claims, not maybes or possiblies. Evidence, documentation, proof that survived despite everything they did to destroy it. And then I'm going to connect every single piece of this history to your life, right now. To the wealth gap, to educational inequality, to the question of reparations, to why your family struggles when you work just as hard as anyone else, to why predominantly Black schools get underfunded, to why Black intellectual achieve. Are you ready? Because what you're about to learn will make you angry. It'll make you proud. It'll make you demand justice, and it should. Let's start in the year 1100, West Africa. A seasonal camp forms at the edge of the Sahara Desert where trade routes meet. Merchants traveling between North Africa and the kingdoms of West Africa need a place to rest, to trade, to resupply. They call this place Timbuktu. For the next 200 years, Timbuktu grows. Gold flows north from the mines of West Africa. Salt flows south from the Sahara. And something else flows in both directions. Something even more valuable than gold or salt. Knowledge. Books. Ideas. Scholars. By 1300, Timbuktu has exploded into something unprecedented. The intellectual capital of the world, located at the crossroads of trans-Saharan trade routes. Gold, salt, ivory, and books move through its markets daily. But here's what made Timbuktu different from just another wealthy trade city. The people of Timbuktu valued books more than gold. Literally. They would trade gold for books. Rare manuscripts sold for prices higher than jewelry. Think about that for a moment. While Europeans were hoarding gold and building castles, Africans were trading gold for books. What does that tell you about their priorities, about their values, about their civilization? Then comes 1324. This is the year everything changes. Emperor Mansa Musa, ruler of the Mali Empire, embarks on his legendary Hajj to Mecca. This isn't just any pilgrimage. Mansa Musa travels with 60,000 people, 80 camels carrying 2 tons of gold each. He gives away so much gold in Egypt that he crashes their economy for a decade. Cairo's gold market doesn't recover for 10 years. That's how wealthy the Mali Empire was. That's how much gold African kingdoms possessed. But here's what matters more than the gold. Mansa Musa returns from Mecca with architects, scholars, and a vision. He wants to transform Timbuktu into Africa's intellectual crown jewel. He brings back Islamic scholars from Mecca, Cairo, and Baghdad. He commissions the construction of mosques that will become universities. He establishes Timbuktu as a center of Islamic learning. The Sankore Mosque becomes the centerpiece of this transformation. By the end of Mansa Musa's reign in the early 1300s, Sankore Mosque has been converted into a fully functioning Islamic university. Not just a place of worship, a university. With faculty, with curriculum, with standards for graduation, with student housing, with a library that will eventually hold hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. Now here are the numbers that should blow your mind. Sankore University could house 25,000 students at once. Let me say that again, so it sinks in. 25,000 students. To put that in perspective, Harvard University didn't reach 25,000 students until the 1970s. That's 600 years later. Oxford University in England, founded in 1096, had maybe a few hundred students in the 1300s. The University of Paris, considered the greatest in medieval Europe, had perhaps 5,000 students at its peak. Sankore had 25,000. But enrollment numbers only tell part of the story. What were they teaching? What knowledge was flowing through Timbuktu? This is where it gets really interesting. This is where you see just how advanced African scholarship was, while Europe was still in what they call the Dark Ages. The curriculum at Sankore University covered everything. Islamic theology and law formed the foundation. Students studied Quranic exegesis, Hadith scholarship, Maliki jurisprudence, which was the dominant school of Islamic law in West Africa. This wasn't superficial study. This was deep, rigorous theological training that took years to complete. But they didn't stop at theology. Mathematics and algebra were core subjects. Sankore scholars taught addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and advanced arithmetic that medieval Europe couldn't comprehend. They used Arabic numerals. You know, the number system the entire world uses today. The one we call Arabic numerals because it came from the Islamic world. Europe didn't widely adopt Arabic numerals until after 1300. Before that, Europeans were still struggling with Roman numerals. Try doing complex mathematics with Roman numerals. Try multiplying ximagetswamp by xthir without converting to Arabic numerals first. It's nearly impossible. While Europeans were counting on their fingers and using primitive abacuses, Sankore students were solving algebraic equations. Then there's astronomy. This wasn't astrology, mind you. This was scientific astronomy. The careful observation and recording of celestial movements, critical for calendar construction, critical for navigation, critical for understanding our place in the universe. Timbuktu scholars gathered astronomical data from Byzantine, Persian, Jewish, Muslim, Syrian, and Zoroastrian sources. They synthesized knowledge from across the known world. They made their own observations. They corrected errors in previous calculations. They advanced the field. Medieval Europe was still stuck using the outdated Ptolemaic model of the universe, the one that insisted Earth was the center and everything revolved around it. Islamic astronomy from Timbuktu and the broader Maghreb region was so advanced that European astronomers depended on it. Until the 14th century, if you were a serious astronomer in Europe, you were reading Arabic texts. You were building on Islamic scholarship because Europe had nothing comparable. Medicine and pharmacology were taught at Sankore with a sophistication that would shock most people today. Surviving manuscripts revealed detailed understanding of anatomy, of herbal remedies, of surgical procedures, of disease treatment. These weren't witch doctors brewing mysterious potions. These were physicians with systematic medical knowledge built on centuries of practice and documentation. Philosophy and logic. Students debated epistemology. How do we know what we know? They studied ethics. What makes an action right or wrong? They explored metaphysics. What is the nature of reality? These are the same questions that European philosophers were asking. The difference is that in Timbuktu, these debates were happening in an environment that valued knowledge for its own sake, where intellectual inquiry was encouraged, where books were treasured. And then there were the experimental sciences: chemistry, physics, optics. Manuscripts document experiments, observations, theories. The scientific method was alive and well in Timbuktu. Now pause for a moment and think about what Europe was doing during this same period, the 1300s and 1400s. Europe was burning books. The Catholic Church systematically destroyed texts it deemed heretical. In 1401, England passed a law called De heretico comburendo. That's Latin for concerning the burning of heretics. This law authorized the burning of heretics and their writings. The church believed heresy spread like plague, invisibly, through contaminated texts. So books became vectors of spiritual disease that had to be incinerated in public spectacles. In 1490, in Seville, Spain, Hebrew Bibles and books written by Jews were burned in massive bonfires. In Salamanca, Spain, more than 6,000 volumes on magic and sorcery were committed to flames. The church feared allowing common people to read the Bible without oversight. Bishops warned it would court chaos. Control of information was everything to medieval European power structures. Do you see the contrast? While Europeans were burning knowledge out of fear, Africans were preserving knowledge out of reverence. While Europe descended into what historians literally call the Dark Ages, Africa was in a golden age of learning. But the curriculum is only part of the story. Let's talk about the library, the 700,000 manuscripts, because this is where the magnitude of Sankore's achievement becomes undeniable. Conservative estimates say the Sankore Library held between 400,000 and 700,000 manuscripts. National Geographic and multiple academic sources confirm that 700,000 manuscripts existed in Timbuktu at its height. 700,000 individual documents, books, treatises, letters, legal documents, scientific observations, poetry, philosophy, history. In Timbuktu, books were literally worth their weight in gold. This isn't a metaphor. This is documented fact. Merchants would trade gold for rare manuscripts. Wealthy families measured their status not by how much gold they possessed, but by how many books filled their private libraries. Literacy was the ultimate status symbol. Education was the greatest inheritance a parent could give a child. The manuscripts covered every aspect of human knowledge. Astronomy charts mapping the heavens, medical treatises detailing treatments for dozens of diseases, mathematical proofs solving complex problems, philosophical debates exploring the nature of existence, legal rulings settling disputes, poetry celebrating beauty and love, family genealogies proving lineage and nobility, property records documenting. This last category is crucial. Property deeds, land ownership documents, proof of wealth. Many manuscripts revealed unjust dealings between families, disputed land, stolen property, false claims of nobility. That's why families guarded them with their lives. These weren't just academic curiosities. These were legal documents. These proved who owned what. These manuscripts. Compare this to European libraries of the same era. The greatest library in medieval Europe might have held 10,000 manuscripts, maybe 20,000 at the absolute peak. The Library of Alexandria in ancient Egypt was legendary precisely because it was so unusual. Most places didn't have anywhere near that level of documentation. Timbuktu had 700,000 manuscripts. This collection rivaled Alexandria itself, the largest library Africa had seen since Alexandria's destruction. And it wasn't controlled by a king or a church. It was distributed, held in private family libraries, in the university, in mosques, spread throughout the city. Which, as we'll see later, is partly why some manuscripts survived when the systematic destruction began. Now, who was coming to study at Sankore? Where were these 25,000 students traveling from? Because this is where you see that Timbuktu wasn't some isolated outpost. It was central to the global intellectual network of its time. Students came from across the Islamic world. From Cairo, Egypt, which was the preeminent center of Islamic scholarship in North Africa. Cairo's Al-Azhar University, founded in 970, was considered the Harvard of the Islamic world, and students from Al-Azhar traveled to Timbuktu to study. Think about that. Students from the most prestigious university in the Islamic world came to Timbuktu because the scholarship there was so renowned. They came from Baghdad, Iraq, from Mecca and Medina in Arabia, from Moorish Spain, particularly Cordoba, which was the intellectual jewel of medieval Europe before the Christian reconquest, even from parts of Christian Europe. European scholars who wanted access to knowledge unavailable in their own lands would travel to Timbuktu if they could make the dangerous journey. Sudanese Muslims stopped in Timbuktu on their Hajj pilgrimage route to Mecca. Many stayed to study. In the 14th century, significant numbers of these trader scholars settled permanently, transforming the city into a thriving scholarly community. You had people from a dozen different regions and cultures, all converging in Timbuktu for one purpose: knowledge. Studies of 16th century chains of scholarly communication show strong relationships between Timbuktu, Egypt, and Mecca. Letters between scholars, references to each other's work, students studying under multiple masters in different cities. Timbuktu wasn't isolated on the edge of the Sahara. It was central to a vast network of Islamic learning, stretching from West Africa to the Middle East. And here's something beautiful. Manuscripts were so plentiful in Timbuktu that students could earn a living by copying texts during their studies. This created a self-sustaining academic economy. Wealthy patrons would pay students to produce copies of important manuscripts. The students earned money to support themselves. The patron got a valuable book. knowledge spread. Compare this to Harvard in 1642, when it graduated its first class. 9 students. 9. The university owned maybe 400 books total. 400. Timbuktu had 700,000 manuscripts that same year, and Sankore had been producing thousands of graduates for over 2 centuries by that point. These weren't tribal villagers. These weren't primitives living in mud huts, waiting for Europeans to bring them civilization. These were doctors, astronomers, mathematicians, philosophers, legal scholars, your ancestors, walking those library halls, studying under master teachers, debating philosophy late into the night, copying manuscripts by candlelight, building on centuries of accumulated knowledge. Now let's talk about what survived, because this is where the story gets both tragic and miraculous. Tragic because of what was lost, miraculous because anything survived at all. Today, the Ahmed Baba Institute in Timbuktu holds nearly 30,000 cataloged manuscripts. Around 60 private family libraries still exist in the city. An estimated 350,000 manuscripts have been inventoried from Timbuktu's various collections. But families still hide many more. They refuse access to researchers. They won't allow their manuscripts to be photographed or cataloged. What? Because they've learned through bitter experience that outsiders steal their heritage. When France conquered Timbuktu in 1893 and established colonial rule, French officers and administrators systematically plundered the libraries. They didn't see manuscripts as valuable historical documents belonging to Molian families. They saw them as exotic curiosities to be collected. Entire libraries were boxed up and shipped to Paris, to London, to other European capitals. The most valuable texts disappeared into private collections of European aristocrats. Many manuscripts were simply burned. Why preserve African scholarship when your entire justification for colonization is African inferiority? So Timbuktu families learned to hide their manuscripts. They buried them underground in sealed containers. They hid them in caves in the desert. They concealed them in secret rooms behind false walls. They passed down the locations to their children with strict instructions. Protect these books. They're more valuable than gold. They're proof of who we are. Some manuscripts were hidden during the Moroccan invasions of the 16th century and remained hidden for centuries. Families forgot exactly where great-great-grandfathers had buried books during a war 400 years earlier. Oral traditions preserved vague locations. Sometimes manuscripts were rediscovered by accident. During French colonial rule from 1894 to 1959, families continued hiding manuscripts. Every time a French officer showed interest in a family library, manuscripts disappeared. Hidden again. Moved to another location. The colonial period taught Timbuktu families a harsh lesson. The outside world will steal your heritage and claim they're preserving it. But here's what proves the resilience of these families. In 2012 and 2013, when Islamic extremists occupied Timbuktu during Mali's civil war, families once again smuggled manuscripts to safety. These extremists, in their warped interpretation of Islam, saw the manuscripts as un-Islamic. They wanted to destroy them. So ordinary Malians, many of them elderly, risked their lives to save the books. They packed manuscripts into trunks, into boxes, into whatever containers they could find. They smuggled them out of Timbuktu by jeep, by canoe, by donkey cart, through dangerous territory controlled by armed militants. Men and women carried them to villages along the Niger River, to Bamako, the capital, to anywhere the manuscripts might be safe. They did this while extremists were literally burning some libraries they discovered, while people were being killed for violating extremist rules. These families risked death to save books. 500 years of protecting knowledge under threat of death. During the Moroccan invasions of the 1500s, during French colonization from the 1890s to the 1950s, during extremist occupation in 2012 and 2013. 5 centuries of families deciding that preserving their intellectual heritage mattered more. Today, a Malian organization called Savama DCI provides technical and financial support to families to conserve manuscripts while keeping them in family ownership. This is crucial. The manuscripts stay with the families who've protected them for centuries. They're not seized by governments or sold to foreign institutions. They're preserved where they belong. Why does all this preservation matter so much? Because these manuscripts are proof. Proof of civilization. Proof of intellectual achievement. Proof of African excellence at a time when Europe was in darkness. Proof that the narrative of primitive Africa is a lie, an intentional, systematic, profitable lie. And that proof is so dangerous to the existing power structure that people have been trying to But before we get deeper into who tried to destroy this evidence and why you need to understand the context. What was happening in Europe while Timbuktu was thriving? Because the contrast isn't just interesting, it's devastating to everything you were taught about who was civilized and who wasn't. Let's go to Europe in the 1300s. The Black Death arrives in 1347. Over the next 4 years, it kills between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population. Imagine that. Half the people you know, dead within 4 years. Cities become death zones. Bodies pile in the streets. The church, which claims to have all the answers, is powerless. Universities close or limp along with skeleton staffs. Knowledge is lost as masters die before they can train apprentices. Europe descends into chaos. During this same period, Timbuktu is thriving. No plague, no mass death. The university is growing. Students are arriving from across the Islamic world. Manuscripts are being copied and distributed. While Europe is literally dying, Africa is flourishing. But the plague isn't even the worst of what Europe is doing to itself. The Catholic Church is systematically burning books. This isn't a few isolated incidents. This is policy. This is ideology. This is the Church's official position on how to deal with ideas. Church authorities believe heresy spreads like plague, invisibly, through contaminated texts. So books become vectors of spiritual disease. The solution: burn them, publicly. Make a spectacle of it. Show everyone what happens to dangerous ideas. They have a name for these book-burning spectacles. Auto da fe, Portuguese for act of faith. The Church stages elaborate public ceremonies where heretics and their books are burned together. This isn't hidden. This isn't shameful. This is celebrated. People gather to watch. The Church frames it as a righteous act, purifying the community, protecting souls from corruption. In 1401, England passes a law specifically authorizing the burning of heretics and their writings. De heretico comburendo. The law is explicit. If you're convicted of heresy, you burn. And your books burn with you. Why? Because the Church fears ideas. It fears people reading and thinking for themselves. It fears loss of control. Specific examples make this real. In 1490, in Seville, Spain, Hebrew Bibles and books written by Jews are burned in massive bonfires. Not because the content is false, not because it's dangerous to public safety, because it's different, because it represents a tradition outside church control. In Salamanca, Spain, more than 6,000 volumes on magic, sorcery, and sciences the church doesn't understand are committed to flames. 6,000 books, decades or centuries of accumulated knowledge, gone. Reduced to ash because they make the church uncomfortable. The church fears allowing common people to read the Bible without priestly oversight. Bishops warn that widespread Bible reading will court chaos. What? Because if people can read scripture themselves, they might interpret it differently than the church does. They might question church authority. So the church's solution is ignorance. Keep people illiterate. Keep books rare and expensive. Keep knowledge locked behind Latin, a language common people don't speak. Control the narrative completely. Meanwhile, in Timbuktu, literacy is celebrated. Books are treasured. Knowledge is pursued for its own sake. There's no central authority burning manuscripts because they contain uncomfortable ideas. Scholars debate freely. Different interpretations coexist. Intellectual inquiry is encouraged. And here's the kicker. Until the 14th century, Europe depends on Arabic and Islamic materials from North Africa and Spain for advances in astronomy and mathematics. European scholars are literally translating Arabic texts to learn basic science. They're centuries behind Islamic scholarship. While Europeans are burning books and dying from plague, Africans are preserving knowledge and advancing it. The contrast couldn't be starker. So let me ask you a question. Based on what I just told you, who was civilized? Who was barbaric? Who valued human knowledge and dignity? Who destroyed it out of fear and ignorance? Everything you were taught was backwards. The so-called Dark Ages in Europe happened while Africa was in a golden age. The so-called civilized West was burning books while Africa was writing them. The narrative you learned in school, the one that presents European history as the story of human progress, while dismissing Africa as primitive, is a lie. An intentional reversal of reality. But Timbuktu wasn't unique in Africa. It wasn't one lucky city that happened to develop learning. This is crucial to understand. Sankore was part of a vast network of African centers of learning. The pattern was systematic. The civilization was widespread. Cairo, Egypt, had Al-Azhar University founded in 970 CE. Al-Azhar is still operating today. It's one of the oldest continuously operating universities in the world. And the connection between Cairo and Timbuktu was profound. Egyptian scholarship influenced Timbuktu. Timbuktu scholarship influenced Egypt. Students traveled between the two cities. Masters trained apprentices who went on to teach in both places. Throughout the Mali Empire and later the Songhai Empire, multiple cities maintained libraries and schools. Jenne, Gao, Walata, all centers of learning, all with their own scholarly traditions, all connected through trade routes and intellectual exchange. This wasn't one isolated university. This was civilization. This was a culture that prioritized education literacy and intellectual achievement across an entire region, spanning thousands of miles, lasting for centuries. When Harvard opened in 1636, it was one university in colonial Massachusetts, a frontier settlement on the edge of what Europeans called the New World. And we're supposed to celebrate this as the birth of higher education in America. Meanwhile, Africa had a network of universities and libraries spanning West Africa and connecting to North Africa and the Middle East, for centuries before Harvard existed. But Harvard gets taught in every American history class. Timbuktu gets erased. Why? I'll tell you exactly why. Because acknowledging this truth destroys the foundation of white supremacy. It proves African intellectual superiority at a time when Europe was drowning in ignorance and superstition. It proves that the entire narrative of European civilization, bringing light to dark Africa, is a reversal of historical reality. And that truth is so dangerous, so threatening to existing power structures that it had to be systematically erased. Let me show you the pattern of erasure. How it happened. Why it happened. Who did it? Because this was an accident. This wasn't natural decline. This was deliberate, systematic, intentional destruction of African achievement and the evidence of that achievement. When France conquered Timbuktu in 1893, French officers didn't arrive as respectful observers of a great civilization. They arrived as conquerors convinced of their own superiority, convinced that they were bringing civilization to Africa. The existence of Sankore's library directly contradicted this narrative. So what did they do? They plundered it. Systematically, methodically. Entire libraries were boxed up. Manuscripts were seized as spoils of war. The most valuable texts were shipped to Paris, to the Bibliothèque Nationale, to private collections of French aristocrats. Some manuscripts were labeled and catalogued. Many simply disappeared into storage or were sold to collectors. But shipping manuscripts to Europe at least meant they survived right-wrong, because many manuscripts weren't considered valuable enough to ship. French colonists burned them. Why preserve African scholarship when your entire justification for colonization is African inferiority? You can't claim you're bringing civilization to primitives if those primitives have libraries surpassing yours. So the evidence has to be destroyed. This isn't speculation. This is documented. French colonial records mention burning manuscripts. Survivor accounts describe seeing libraries burned. The physical evidence of destruction remains. And it wasn't just French colonizers. Families who fled droughts buried manuscripts to protect them. Then adverse climate conditions destroyed many. War, fire, insects eating through parchment, humidity causing pages to rot. Without proper preservation, manuscripts deteriorated. From an estimated 1 million manuscripts in the broader Timbuktu region, perhaps 350,000 to 700,000 survived. That means 300,000 to 650,000 manuscripts were destroyed, gone forever. Centuries of accumulated knowledge, unique insights, historical records, scientific observations, lost. But here's what proves this was about more than just physical destruction. Some manuscripts, DID, make it to Europe. They sit today in museums and university libraries in Paris, London, and other European capitals. So why don't we learn about them? Why aren't they displayed prominently? Why isn't African scholarship celebrated? Because displaying them would require acknowledging where they came from. It would require admitting they were stolen. It would require confronting the lie that Africa had no history worth preserving. So they sit in storage, uncatalogued, unexamined. France, Britain, and other former colonial powers still refuse to return stolen African manuscripts. When Malian officials request repatriation, European institutions claim ownership through acquisition. Acquisition. That's their word for theft. They claim that because they've possessed stolen property for over a century, it's now legally theirs. Imagine applying that logic to any other crime. If I steal your car and keep it for 30 years, does it become mine? If I break into your house, take your family heirlooms and hide them in my attic for generations, do they become my property? Of course not. But that's exactly the logic European museums use to justify keeping African manuscripts. And these institutions have the legal and financial resources to fight any challenge. Malian families who try to prove ownership face impossible legal hurdles in foreign courts. The system protects the thieves, not the victims. But physical and legal theft are only part of the pattern. Educational erasure is more insidious, more damaging, more lasting, because it shapes what entire generations believe about themselves and their history. Western history textbooks mention ancient Egypt. They love talking about the pyramids, about pharaohs, about hieroglyphics. Why? Because it's geographically convenient to separate North Africa from sub-Saharan Africa. They can talk about Egypt while still maintaining the myth that Black Africa, but Timbuktu erased. The Mali Empire. Maybe a footnote if you're lucky. Mansa Musa. Some textbooks mention his wealth, but frame it as exotic curiosity, not evidence of systematic civilization. Sankore University never mentioned. Not once. Not in standard American history curricula. African American students for generations learned they descended from primitive tribes. They were taught African history began with slavery, as if their ancestors didn't exist before European contact, as if Africa was just sitting there, empty, waiting for Europeans to arrive and give it meaning and purpose. This is what they taught your parents, your grandparents. Think about the psychological impact of that lie. Growing up believing your ancestors contributed nothing to human civilization. That everything you are starts with slavery. That your people's story begins with subjugation and suffering. No glory, no achievement, no intellectual tradition, just victimhood. That's not education. That's psychological warfare. And it's intentional. The terminology itself manipulates perception. Listen to how textbooks describe African history versus European history. European explorers discover places, as if Africans didn't know their own continent existed until white men showed up. Africans live in tribes. Europeans live in nations. See the difference? Tribe sounds primitive. Nation sounds sophisticated. Same concept, different words, different implications. Africans have chiefs. Europeans have kings. Africans have folklore. Europeans have history. Africans have traditional medicine. Europeans have science. Every word choice subtly delegitimizes African achievement while elevating European equivalents. And then there's the omission strategy. Textbooks don't always explicitly lie, though many do. More often they simply skip African achievement. They omit it. They allocate one paragraph to the Mali Empire while dedicating entire chapters to medieval Europe. One page about African kingdoms, 50 pages about European monarchies. The message is clear through sheer proportion. Europe matters. Africa doesn't. Students can graduate high school never having heard of Sankore University. They can earn college degrees in history without ever learning that Timbuktu had 700,000 manuscripts. This isn't because the information is hard to find. It's because curricula are designed to exclude it. Even in 2025, most American universities offer minimal African history courses. They're electives, specializations, not part of the core curriculum. You can get a bachelor's degree, even a master's degree in history, having taken 0 courses on African civilization. Try doing that while skipping European history. Impossible. European history is required. African history is optional. The message European history is essential to being educated. African history is a niche interest. And here's the compounding effect. Teachers can't teach what they were never taught. Your elementary school teacher probably had no idea Sankore University existed. Not because she was malicious or racist, because she was a victim of the same educational erasure. Her teachers didn't teach her. Their teachers didn't teach them. Generation after generation, the gap compounds. Teachers unknowingly perpetuate erasure because they're working with curricula designed generations ago by people who had specific interests in maintaining white supremacy. The system is self-perpetuating. Each generation teaches the next what they were taught. The lie becomes truth through repetition. Why does educational erasure matter so much? Because it controls what children believe. And children become adults. If Black children never learn their ancestors built universities, they internalize inferiority. They grow up believing the lie that Black people aren't intellectual, that academic achievement isn't part of Black culture, that they're anomalies if they excel in school. Meanwhile, white children never learn that Africans surpassed Europeans intellectually for centuries. They grow up with the default assumption that Western civilization is the pinnacle of human achievement, that white people invented everything important, that colonization was justified because Europe brought civilization to primitive peoples. They never question white supremacy because they never encounter evidence that educational erasure shapes identity. It shapes self-perception. It shapes what people believe is possible. And that makes it more powerful than any law or policy. Because it works invisibly, it makes people police themselves, limit themselves, based on lies they don't even know are lies. But education is only one mechanism of suppression. Media manipulation works alongside it, creating emotional impressions that override facts, shaping how people feel about Africa, even if they know almost nothing factual about it. When Western media mentions Timbuktu at all, and that's rare, it frames the city as remote, exotic. The phrase "from here to Timbuktu" became English idiom, meaning the middle of nowhere. Think about that. The intellectual capital of the medieval world, a city with 25,000 university students, reduced to a metaphor for insignificance. That's not accident. That's narrative control. Making the very name Timbuktu synonymous with irrelevance ensures people don't take its history seriously. When articles do discuss Sankore's achievement, they use a specific framing. Impressive for Africa. Advanced for its time. Remarkable considering. Every qualifier subtly suggests African achievement is surprising, exceptional, not normal. The implication Europe is the standard. Africa occasionally produces outliers. You'd never see an article say, European universities were impressive for Europe. The achievement is presented as universal, as simply impressive, period. But African achievement always comes with qualifiers that that suggest it's noteworthy precisely because it's African. Modern media focuses obsessively on Timbuktu's current poverty and political instability. Every news story shows crumbling buildings, refugee camps, armed conflicts. This isn't because Timbuktu is uniquely troubled. Many cities face challenges. But the emphasis on present decline serves a purpose. It allows audiences to dismiss past greatness. The logic is subtle but effective. Look how poor Timbuktu is now. Surely it was never really that great. Present conditions are used to retroactively deny historical achievement, as if a city's current state determines its entire history. By that logic, Detroit was never an industrial powerhouse. Any city facing economic decline must never have been prosperous. And when stories do cover manuscript preservation, watch how they're framed. They emphasize European and American conservationists saving manuscripts, white saviors preserving African heritage. The Malian families who protected those manuscripts for 500 years through invasions, colonization, and civil war barely mentioned, reduced to background characters in their own story. This framing erases African agency. It suggests Africans can't preserve their own heritage, that they need Western intervention, that even their own history belongs to the West. To save the undercoverage of African discoveries compared to European ones is stark. When archaeologists discover Roman ruins in Europe, it's international news. Major museum exhibitions, documentary series. But significant manuscript discoveries in Timbuktu receive minimal Western media attention. A brief article, a short segment buried in the news cycle, then silence. The disparity in coverage is extreme. It's not proportional to importance or newness of discovery. It's ideological. European history gets amplified. African history gets minimized. The pattern is so consistent, it can't be coincidence. Even the vocabulary of coverage matters. Pay attention to word choices. African tribes versus European nations. African chiefs versus European kings, African folklore versus European history, African traditional knowledge versus European science. The language subtly delegitimizes African civilization even when reporting factual information. Visual representation compounds this. When media shows Timbuktu, what images do they use? Mud brick buildings, sandy streets, poverty. They don't show the grandeur that existed. They don't show reconstructions of what Sankore looked like at its height. They don't show manuscripts in pristine condition, only damaged ones. The visual language emphasizes decay and primitive. Why does media manipulation matter? Because it shapes emotional perception. Facts matter less than feelings in how people form beliefs. If people feel that Africa was primitive, they won't question the facts they were taught. If images of poverty dominate their mental picture of Africa, they'll assume it was always poor. Emotional manipulation is more powerful than explicit lies, because emotions bypass critical thinking. They create impressions that feel true, even when contradicted by evidence. And those impressions are extremely hard to change. The result of all these suppression mechanisms working together. Even well-meaning, people have been conditioned to doubt African achievement. When you say, Timbuktu had 700,000 manuscripts, their first instinct is disbelief. Not because you lack evidence, because the narrative control is that effective. Because they've been taught their entire lives that Africa had nothing. Because admitting African intellectual superiority requires demolishing their entire worldview. And that's exactly why the erasure happened. That's why it continues. Because this truth threatens every. So let's connect this history to your life right now. Today, December 2025. Because this isn't ancient history. This isn't irrelevant to modern problems. This is the modern problem. The theft continues. The impact compounds. And understanding the through line from Timbuktu to today changes everything. Let's start with numbers everyone knows. The racial wealth gap. In 2025, the median white household has $188,000 in wealth. Assets minus debts. The median black household has $24,000. That's not a typo. White families have almost 8 times the wealth of black. Now here's what they tell you. This gap exists because black people don't work hard enough. Don't save money. Don't prioritize education. Don't make good financial decisions. They frame it as a failure of black culture, a problem of black behavior. If black people would just do what white people do, the gap would close. That's a lie, a deliberate, vicious, profitable lie. And the history of Timbuktu proves it. Your ancestors built universities. They accumulated knowledge, the most valuable wealth that exists. They created libraries worth more than gold mines. Literally. Books were traded for their weight in gold in Timbuktu. Your ancestors were intellectuals, scholars, and millionaires by any measure. So what happened? Where did that wealth go? I'll tell you exactly where it went. It was stolen, systematically, violently, legally, over centuries. When Europeans colonized Africa, they didn't just take land. They took intellectual property. They took manuscripts worth fortunes. They took the evidence of African wealth and achievement. Imagine owning a library of 700,000 books in the modern world. Imagine the value of that collection. Now, imagine someone stealing it, claiming they're preserving it, and charging people fees to access it while you get nothing. That's what happened. European museums and universities possess stolen African manuscripts right now. Today, they profit from them. Researchers pay to access them. Publishers sell books about them. Institutions build reputations on them. And the African families who preserved those manuscripts through 500 years of persecution, they get nothing. No compensation, no credit, no ownership. But the theft goes deeper than physical manuscripts. Think about intellectual property in the modern sense. When someone writes a book, they own the copyright. Their children inherit it. Their grandchildren benefit from it. Generational wealth from intellectual achievement. Your ancestors' intellectual work was stolen and repackaged as European discovery. Ideas developed in Timbuktu were studied in European capitals, then taught as Western knowledge. The intellectual legacy that should have compounded for your benefit went to enrich European institutions instead. Now imagine an alternate history. Imagine Sankore University had continued operating, uninterrupted. Imagine those 700,000 manuscripts had remained in African hands. Imagine the intellectual tradition growing, investing, compounding for 500 years. Where would those families be today? They'd be intellectual dynasties, equivalent to families who founded Harvard or Oxford. That wealth would be generational, multi-generational, enormous. Families who owned libraries in 1500 would own universities today. The wealth gap wouldn't exist. It would be reversed, but that's not what happened. That wealth was transferred, not lost. Transferred from African hands to European hands. The wealth didn't disappear from the universe. It changed ownership through theft. And when you see European institutions charging researchers fees to access African manuscripts, understand what's happening. They're profiting from stolen property. They're making money from your ancestors' intellectual work. Work those ancestors should have been compensated for. Work that should have created generational wealth for your family. The wealth gap isn't about present behavior. It's about historic theft that was never remedied, never compensated, never even acknowledged. Every dollar of wealth Europeans extracted from Africa is a dollar African families should have. Plus 500 years of economists estimate colonialism stole over $100 trillion in today's money from Africa. 100 trillion. That's not counting the value of people stolen during the slave trade. That's just resource extraction and labor theft. Add in intellectual property, and the number goes higher. Where would Black Americans be if that wealth had remained where it belonged? If your great-great-great-grandparents had inherited wealth instead of starting from zero after slavery? If your grandparents had generational wealth to invest in education property businesses, you'd be rich. Your family would be rich. The wealth gap would not exist. Because the gap isn't natural. It's not the result of different work ethics or cultural values. It's the result of theft. Systematic, documented, ongoing. And here's the thing that should make you furious. They tell you slavery ended in 1865. Get over it. Move on. That was 160 years ago. Why are you still talking about it? But they're lying about the timeline. Timbuktu manuscripts were being stolen from 1893 to 1959 during French colonial rule. That's within your grandparents' lifetime. Your grandmother could have been alive when this theft was happening. This isn't ancient history. This is recent crime. In 2012 and 2013, manuscripts were still under threat. Families still smuggling them to safety. The theft is ongoing. The destruction continues. The suppression of African achievement is happening. So when people say reparations are about something that happened long ago, they're lying. The crime is current. The victims are alive. The stolen property sits in European museums today. This isn't about compensating distant historical wrongs. This is about returning stolen property that's currently in the thief's possession. What is owed? Let's be specific. 700,000 manuscripts stolen or destroyed. Each manuscript worth thousands of dollars at minimum. Many worth millions. You have original scientific treatises, philosophical texts, historical documents from civilizations that no longer exist. The monetary value is tens of billions of dollars at minimum, possibly hundreds of, but it's not just about money. Reparations for manuscripts means return. European museums must give back what they stole, not copies, not digital scans, the physical manuscripts themselves. Returned to the families who own them, returned to the communities they were stolen from. France holds thousands of African manuscripts in its national library. Britain holds thousands more. Germany, Spain, Portugal. Every colonial power sitting on African intellectual property right now. They need to return it. All of it. Immediately. Without compensation. You don't get paid to return stolen. There's legal precedent for this. When artwork stolen by Nazis is discovered, it gets returned to the families who owned it. Doesn't matter how long ago the theft occurred. Doesn't matter how many times the art changed hands. Doesn't matter if the current possessor bought it legally. Stolen property must be returned. Period. Apply that same principle to African manuscripts. Same crime, same justice required. The only difference is the identity of the victims. And that shouldn't matter. Justice is justice. But they resist. European institutions fight repatriation requests with armies of lawyers. Why? Because acknowledging theft means acknowledging debt. Acknowledging debt means paying. They'd rather maintain the lie than they'll claim returning manuscripts would damage scholarship, that only European institutions can properly preserve them. That's insulting. It's saying African institutions can't be trusted with their own heritage. The same families that protected these manuscripts for 500 years through invasions and wars somehow can't be trusted now that they want them back. That's not about preservation. That's about control. That's about maintaining power over African history. And who gets to tell it? Educational reparations matter just as much as economic ones. Every textbook that erased Timbuktu must be corrected. Every curriculum that taught primitive Africa must be overhauled. Every school that graduated students without teaching African intellectual history owes. This isn't about adding a chapter. This is about fundamentally restructuring how history is taught, making African civilization central, not peripheral, teaching students that human civilization began in Africa and that African intellectual achievement continued for millennia. Not as interesting side note, as core human history. Black students deserve to learn their ancestors were professors. White students deserve to learn their ancestors were centuries behind African scholarship. Everyone deserves truth instead of lies. That's what educational reparations mean. Now let me connect this to current struggles you see every day. The through line from Timbuktu to 2025. Because history doesn't repeat. It rhymes, the patterns persist, the mechanisms evolve, but the theft continues. When Black students' intelligence gets questioned, when they're tracked into vocational programs instead of advanced academics, that's rooted in the erasure of Sankore. The lie that Black people aren't intellectual requires erasing the fact that your ancestors ran universities. If students learned that Africans were teaching Europeans science in the 1400s, the stereotype of Black anti-intellectualism would be impossible to maintain. So the erasure serves present interests. It's not just about the past, it's about justifying current inequality. Resource extraction continues in new forms. Just as colonizers extracted African manuscripts, modern systems extract Black intellectual labor. Black culture, music, fashion, language, constantly appropriated and profited from by others. Hip-hop becomes a multi-billion-dollar industry. Who owns most of that wealth? Not the Black artists who created it. The same pattern. Extract value, transfer wealth, deny credit. Black slang becomes mainstream, then gets coded as unprofessional when Black people use it. but white people can adopt it freely. That's linguistic colonization, stealing language while devaluing the speakers. Education funding reveals the same pattern. Schools in predominantly black neighborhoods are underfunded and under-resourced. Why not? Because there's not enough money in America for education. Because the system was never designed to educate black children as scholars. It was designed to train them as labor. That's the legacy of erasing Sankore. If society believed black children descended from professors, funding their schools would be priority. But if society believes black children descended from primitives, why invest in their intellectual development? The lie justifies the neglect. Black scholars who research African history face institutional barriers. Their work gets marginalized, underfunded, questioned, dismissed as niche or identity politics. Why? Because validating African achievement threatens the entire narrative structure that justifies inequality. A black professor researching Timbuktu has trouble getting grants, but a white professor researching minor European nobility gets funded easily. That's not about quality of scholarship. That's about which narratives the system wants amplified. And here's the assumption underlying everything. Western civilization is superior to all others. That belief requires erasing evidence of African superiority. Timbuktu's existence is an existential threat to white supremacy, because it proves beyond doubt that Africans created civilization equal to or surpassing anything Europe achieved. So the system has to keep Timbuktu hidden, has to keep textbooks from teaching it, has to keep media from celebrating it, because widespread knowledge of this history would demolish the ideological foundation of racial hierarchy. That's why this matters now, in December 2025, because we have the evidence, we have the manuscripts, we have the scholarship. We can prove what was stolen. We can prove the lie you were taught. We can prove your ancestors' greatness. The question is, what are we going to do with that proof? Will we demand what's owed? Will we teach our children the truth? Will we reject the lie completely? And let me tell you something. You have a choice in this moment. You can accept the lie you were taught, that your ancestors contributed nothing, that Africa was primitive, that black people are naturally disadvantaged. You can go back to that lie. It's comfortable in a way, familiar. Or you can accept the truth, that your ancestors were professors when Europeans were peasants, that your ancestors built universities while Europeans burned books, that your poverty isn't your fault, it was stolen from you, that you're not disadvantaged, you're dispossessed, and accepting that truth changes everything, because victims ask for help. But the dispossessed demand the return of what's theirs. Victims might get charity. The dispossessed are owed a debt. The language changes. The posture changes. The power dynamic changes. So let me reframe your identity for you, based on truth, based on evidence, based on history they tried to erase, but failed to destroy. You are not victims of circumstance. You are not products of unfortunate history. You are survivors of intellectual genocide. They tried to murder your civilization. They tried to erase every trace that it existed. They tried to make you forget who you are, and they failed. The manuscripts survived. The families protected them. The truth persisted. You're watching this video right now. You're learning what they tried to hide. Their genocide failed. Your ancestors weren't slaves who happened to be enslaved. Read that again. They were doctors who were enslaved, astronomers who were enslaved, professors who were enslaved, intellectuals who were kidnapped, trafficked, and forced into labor. The enslavement doesn't define them. Their achievement defines them. The enslavement was what happened to them, not who they were. When you understand you descend from scholars, you move differently in the world. When you know your ancestors ran universities, you demand education differently. You don't ask if you belong in advanced classes. You know you belong there. It's in your DNA. When you recognize you're heir to 700,000 manuscripts, you claim intellectual space differently. You don't apologize for being smart. You don't downplay your intelligence to make others comfortable. You own it, because it's your inheritance. Here's what's crucial to understand. You're not poor because your ancestors were poor. You're poor because your ancestors were rich and their wealth was stolen. There's a massive difference. Poverty from laziness would be shameful. But poverty from robbery is injustice, and injustice demands correction. You are descendants of the Sankore scholars. You are heirs to the Timbuktu libraries. You carry that intellectual DNA. Claim it. Stop letting anyone make you feel less than. Stop internalizing inferiority. Stop accepting the lie that you're naturally disadvantaged. You're not disadvantaged. You're dispossessed. You're not a minority. You're the majority robbed. You're not struggling. You're recovering from systematic theft. See how the language changes everything. When you reframe your identity from victim to dispossessed heir, the entire dynamic shifts. You're not asking for help. You're demanding return of what was stolen. You're not seeking charity. You're collecting a debt. That's power. That's the power of knowing your history. That's why they had to erase it. Because once you know who you really are, you become dangerous to systems built on your ignorance. Now let me tell you about your ancestors' greatness. Because you need to feel pride. Deep, unshakable pride in where you come from. Pride that no one can take from you. Your ancestors built Sankore University. 25,000 students. 700,000 manuscripts. While Europeans were dying from plague and burning books, your ancestors were teaching the world. Students came from 3 continents to learn from African masters. That's who you come from. Your ancestors preserved knowledge through 500 years of persecution. During the Moroccan invasions of the 1500s, they hid manuscripts. During French colonization from the 1890s to the 1950s, they hid manuscripts. During extremist occupation in 2012 and 2013, they still protected those books. 5 centuries of choosing knowledge over safety. That's your legacy. Your ancestors studied astronomy and calculated celestial movements with precision that European astronomers depended on. They practiced medicine and performed surgeries. They mastered mathematics that Europe wouldn't understand for centuries. They wrote philosophy exploring questions humans still debate today. Your ancestors valued books more than gold. Think about what that means. In a world where gold bought power safety armies, they chose books. They chose knowledge. They chose wisdom. That was their priority. Education was the highest status symbol. Literacy was the greatest inheritance. That's the culture you come from. Your ancestors taught students from Cairo, Baghdad, Mecca, Cordoba, from across Africa and the Islamic world. Their reputation for scholarship drew the world to them. People traveled for months across deserts and oceans to study under African masters. That's the respect your ancestors commanded. And they did all this while facing invasions, political instability, climate challenges, resource scarcity, war, persecution. And yet they prioritized education. They protected knowledge. They refused to let learning die. They could have focused solely on survival, on military defense, on accumulating weapons. They chose books instead. That takes a special kind of courage, a special kind of vision. Let me give you a comparison that should fill you with pride. Harvard's first graduating class in 1642 had 9 students. 9. The entire university owned maybe 400 books. Sankore's average enrollment was thousands. Sankore's library held 700,000 manuscripts. Your ancestors weren't competing with Europe. They were surpassing it by centuries. That strength is in your DNA. That dedication to knowledge is in your blood. That refusal to surrender is your inheritance. You come from people who valued wisdom over wealth, who protected truth through persecution, who built intellectual empires that surpassed anything their contemporaries achieved. Claim that. Own that identity. Walk in that pride. Because it's not arrogance if it's true. And this is true. Documented. Proven. Your ancestors were magnificent. And that magnificence lives in you. Now let me tell you why you're here. Why God preserved your line through everything that should have destroyed it. Because there's a reason you're alive right now. There's a reason you're watching this video in December 2025. This isn't coincidence. This is divine appointment. Think about this carefully. God preserved your ancestors through the Middle Passage. 20 million Africans stolen. Maybe half died during the crossing. Thrown overboard. Starved. Diseased. Dead before reaching the Americas. But your lineage survived. God brought your ancestors through 400 years of chattel slavery. Families torn apart. Children sold away from mothers. Husbands separated from wives. Languages forbidden. Names erased. Cultures destroyed. Identities stripped. And yet somehow, your family line persisted. Survived. Continued. Why God kept your people alive through Jim Crow, through terrorism, through lynching, through massacres, through systematic violent legal oppression. They tried to erase you completely, through murder, through fear, through breaking spirits. And they failed. You're here. Why? God protected those manuscripts through 500 years of invasions, colonization, and attempted destruction. Some burned, many stolen. But 350,000 to 700,000 survived. Against all odds, through everything. Why? I'll tell you why. Because you have a mission. You are here to reveal truth. You are here to demand justice. You are here to reclaim what was stolen. This is your divine purpose. This is why you survived when millions didn't. This isn't just political struggle. This isn't just economic justice. This is spiritual warfare. The enemy wants you ignorant of your past because your past gives you power. The enemy wants you believing lies because truth makes you dangerous. The enemy wants you thinking you're victims because victims stay powerless. But heirs demand their inheritance. Think about the biblical parallel. The Israelites in exile, separated from their homeland, surrounded by people telling them they were nothing, that their God was weak, that their history didn't matter. But they carried the truth in their hearts. They remembered who they were. They told their children. They preserved their identity through generations of oppression. And eventually they returned. They rebuilt. They reclaimed. You are in that same position right now, separated from your intellectual homeland, told your history doesn't matter, told your ancestors were nothing, surrounded by lies. But you carry the truth in your DNA. You are the remnant preserved for this moment. God didn't preserve you just to survive. He preserved you to thrive, to rebuild, to restore, to reclaim. Survival was just the first step. Now comes the restoration. Now comes the justice. Now comes the reckoning. You are the generation that will see the manuscripts returned. You are the generation that will rewrite the textbooks. You are the generation that will collect the debt. God positioned you here now for this purpose. Not your grandparents' generation. Not your children's generation. Your generation. This is your time. So stop asking God, why me? Start declaring I was chosen for this. Stop praying for survival. Start praying for restoration. Stop begging. Start demanding. Because you're not asking for favors. You're collecting what's owed. Your mission is clear. Tell this truth to everyone. Don't let another day pass without someone learning what you just learned. Teach your children. Sit them down tonight. Tell them about Sankore. Tell them about the 700,000 manuscripts. Tell them their ancestors were professors. Give them that pride, that identity, that power. Demand curriculum changes in your local schools. Contact the principal. Contact the school board. Show them this video. Ask them directly, are you teaching about Sankore University? And when they say no, demand they add it. Your tax dollars fund those schools. Your children attend them. You have the right to demand truth in education. Support manuscript preservation efforts. Organizations in Mali are working to conserve and protect manuscripts. They need funding. They need attention. They need support from the diaspora. Find them. Support them. Help protect your heritage. Push for reparations. Write your representatives. Join advocacy organizations. Show up to town halls. Make noise. Because silence is consent. If you know what was stolen and you say nothing, you're complicit in the ongoing theft. But most importantly, never let them erase this history again. You are the keeper of this truth now. You have a responsibility. Every person you tell becomes another keeper. The truth spreads. The lie loses power. Justice becomes inevitable. If this truth shocked you, I need you to do something right now. Type Sankore in the comments. Let me see how many people never learned this in school. Because those comments matter. They show YouTube this video needs to be seen. They tell the algorithm to push this to more people. They create community among truth seekers. And hit that like button. I know. Everyone asks for likes. But understand what that button means for this video. Every like tells YouTube people value this content, that it should be promoted, that it should reach more people. They suppressed this truth for 500 years. Don't let YouTube suppress it now. That like is your voice saying, this matters. Share this video, right now. Think of 3 people who need to know this truth. Your mama, your cousin, your friend from church. The young person in your life who's struggling with identity. The person who still believes the lies about Africa. Share it with them. Copy the link. Send it. Post it. Don't wait. Because every hour you wait is another hour someone lives in ignorance. This channel exists for one reason: to expose the truths they buried. Sankore is just one story. We have hundreds more. The Tulsa Massacre, Black Wall Street, African kingdoms that rivaled European empires, inventions stolen and credited to white inventors, massacres erased from textbooks, wealth systematically stolen and never returned. Every week, new videos exposing new truths, but YouTube won't show them to you automatically. Even if you're subscribed, you have to hit that bell notification. Tell YouTube you demand to see these videos the moment they drop. Because the algorithm buries truth. It promotes whatever keeps people calm and complicit. Truth disrupts that. So you have to actively choose it. We're in a war for historical truth, for identity, for justice. And your engagement in these videos is how we win. Every view, every like, every share, every comment. That's how truth spreads in 2025. That's how we overcome 500 years of suppression. Together, as a community of truth seekers. You've made it this far. That means you're serious. That means You're ready. So let me tell you exactly what needs to happen next. Subscribe to this channel right now. We're exposing hundreds more stories they erased from history, from African kingdoms to stolen inventions, from massacres to systematic wealth theft. We're bringing all of it to light. Every video as detailed and documented as this one. Every video giving you ammunition for the arguments you'll have. Every video building your knowledge and pride. Turn on that notification bell. Don't skip this step. YouTube doesn't automatically show you videos from channels you subscribe to unless you demand it. Hit that bell. Choose all notifications. Make sure you see every single video the moment it drops. Here's what I need you to do today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today, tell someone this story. Your children, your parents, your friends, your pastor, your co-workers, anyone who will listen. Don't let this truth die with this video. Pass it on. Make it live. Make it spread. If you have children in school, ask their teachers this question. Are you teaching about Sankore University? Are you teaching that Africa had universities before Harvard existed? And when they say no, and they will say, no, show them this video. Give them the evidence. Demand they include it in their curriculum. You have that power. Use it. Find other people who know this history. Build community. Share resources. Study together. Organize together. We are stronger together. The system wants you isolated, thinking you're the only one who knows. You're not. Thousands of people are waking up to this truth. Find them. Connect. Build. Contact your representatives about reparations, about returning stolen African manuscripts from European museums, about educational justice, about curriculum changes. Make your voice heard, because politicians respond to pressure. Give them that pressure, consistently, persistently, loudly. You have a choice right now in this moment. Go back to accepting the lie or step into the truth and fight for justice. Ignorance might be comfortable, but it's also bondage. Truth might be painful, but it's also freedom. Choose freedom. Choose truth. Choose justice. This is our history. We must preserve it. We must teach it. We must never let them erase us again. Your ancestors protected this truth through 500 years of persecution. They did their part. Now, you have to do yours. Pass truth to the next generation. Make sure your children never grow up believing they come from nothing. Make sure they know they descend from greatness, from scholars, from professors, from people who valued wisdom over everything. That's the inheritance you give them. Not just money, not just property. Identity, truth, pride. This battle is spiritual as much as it is intellectual. So before I let you go, we need to pray. We need to invite God into this struggle. We need to acknowledge His hand in preserving this truth. We need to ask His blessing on what comes next. Bow your head with me, wherever you are. Whatever you're doing, just take this moment. This is important. Heavenly Father, we come before you with grateful hearts. We thank you for preserving this truth through 500 years of attempts to bury it. We thank you that manuscripts survived fire and theft and war. We thank you that families remained faithful to their mission to protect knowledge. We thank you that we can sit here today and learn what was almost lost forever. We thank you for the families of Timbuktu who risked death to hide manuscripts in 1500, in 1893, in 1950, in 2012. Their courage saved our history. Their faithfulness preserved our heritage. Their sacrifice made this moment possible. Bless them, Father. Reward them. Honor them. We thank you for the scholars of Sankore University who taught the world when Europe was in darkness, who valued knowledge over gold, who believed education was the highest calling, who created intellectual legacy that lasted centuries. Let their names be remembered. Let their work be honored. Let their greatness be recognized finally and fully. We pray for justice, Father. Justice for every manuscript stolen and sitting in European museums right now. We ask that you convict the hearts of those who possess stolen property. Move them to return what they took. If they refuse, expose them. Bring public pressure. Make the theft so obvious that keeping the manuscripts becomes impossible. We pray for the restoration of what was taken. The books, the wealth, the reputation, the truth. Restore it all, Father. Every manuscript, every dollar, every bit of dignity and pride that was stolen. Restore it sevenfold, as you promise in your word. We pray for awakening. For every black child who was taught they came from nothing, reveal to them they came from scholars, from professors, from intellectuals who built universities surpassing anything Europe could claim. Shatter the lie of inferiority. Replace it with truth of greatness. We pray for those who continue to suppress this truth. The textbook publishers who erase African achievement. The museum curators who hide African manuscripts. The educators who perpetuate lies. The media that minimizes African civilization. Convict their hearts, Father. Bring them to repentance. Show them the harm they've caused. And if they refuse to repent, expose them. Bring their deeds into the light, where they can be seen and judged. Bless every person who shares this video. Protect them from attacks, from those who will call them divisive or angry for speaking truth. Strengthen them for the fight ahead. Give them courage. Give them wisdom. Give them words to speak truth clearly and powerfully. Vindicate the memory of our ancestors. Let their names be honored in textbooks. Let their achievements be celebrated in classrooms. Let their legacy be restored to its rightful place in human history. They deserve that. We demand that. Make it so, Father. Give us courage to demand what is ours, not to beg, not to ask politely, to demand. Because we're not seeking favors. We're collecting debts. Give us boldness to speak truth to power, to challenge systems, to refuse silence and compliance. Give us wisdom to teach our children. Help us pass this knowledge down intact and alive. Let it transform how they see themselves, how they move in the world, how they claim their space and demand their inheritance. Give us strength to never accept the lie again, to reject it every time we encounter it, to correct it every time we hear it, to replace it with truth every time we speak. Make us warriors for historical truth and justice. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Walk in truth, family. Demand justice. You are the heir to 700,000 manuscripts. You are the descendant of scholars. You are free. Free from the lie. Free from internalized inferiority. Free from accepting less than you're owed. Free. This is Black America unveiled. We expose the truths they buried. We reclaim the heritage they stole. We demand the justice they denied. Until next time, build knowledge. Demand reparations. Remember Sankore. Remember who you are. Remember what you're owed. And never ever let them erase us again. Peace.